In this video, in a somewhat spontaneous and lighthearted way, I try to bring together thoughts on a serious issue that have appeared in other videos here and there in passing over the last 4 years to make a simple, direct statement about why it is I'm actually opposed to civil disobedience, an idea that's so hallowed on the left and the right across the political spectrum. It has so many romanticized quotes attached to it that I think many people would just be shocked to know that someone who sincerely cares about politics, about getting organized and pursuing political change, would dare to question this hallowed tradition. But you know, one of the disadvantages of doing a video like this in such a spontaneous way is that watching it back afterwards, it occurred to me I missed one of the most important points that I have made repeatedly in my criticisms of some of my contemporary vegan leaders, other vegan activists. It's a simple point, but it's one that has, I think, so much importance that I wanted to stop now and add this at the start of what is admittedly a longer video than I'd intended it to be. Guys, if you make these excuses for illegal activities, if you make these excuses for civil disobedience, please try to imagine what your life would be like if your worst enemies took the same liberties and engaged in the same tactics. If you think it's okay for Direct Action Everywhere to climb over the barrier and interrupt Bernie Sanders in the name of veganism, if you're going to bring out these quotations from Martin Luther King Jr. and Mahatma Gandhi and say, oh, well, it's in the name of challenging an unjust law, therefore breaking the laws is justified, guess what? The neo-Nazis would see things exactly the same way. From the perspective of the vast majority of the population, the position that vegans are self-righteously trying to pursue is just as laughable, just as irrational, just as extreme as what the neo-Nazis are trying to pursue. Okay? I'm not just saying this to, I don't know, make you feel bad about being vegan. I mean, the point is, either you believe in the pursuit of competing political ends and the free market of ideas, democratic contexts for debate and discourse, or you believe in civil disobedience for everyone, not just for the people who happen to agree with your own idiosyncratic sense of justice, your own idiosyncratic sense of what's right and wrong, your own idiosyncratic sense also of priority. Because what other people see as an emergency, you may see as business as usual. What other people see as a calamity threatening Western civilization itself, you may see as no big deal. I think you all know, I mean, whether you look at the far left or the far right, there are people who think that business as usual at the banks is a crime against God. There are Muslim fundamentalists who are fundamentally opposed to banking, the charging of interest, usury. They want to tear down the banks. There are neo-Nazis who want to kick out all the immigrants. There are all kinds of people who, from their perspective, are acting in the pursuit of something just and honorable, and they'll very gladly step over that line between the legal definition, no matter how arbitrary, of what's right and wrong. If you think it's okay for Direct Action Everywhere or for vegan extremists or for vegan activists to kick down the doors and break into laboratories, then you believe it's okay for Catholic fundamentalists to do it at abortion clinics. If this is permissible for us, it's permissible for everyone. So when you make excuses for Wayne Seong breaking into a laboratory and destroying scientific experiments in the name of veganism, will you extend this same glorification of civil disobedience to Catholics, Muslims, I don't know, maybe just Protestants who are anti-abortion, breaking into abortion clinics? How about hippies who are anti-vax, breaking into vaccine clinics and destroying chemicals used to inoculate people against diseases? All this stuff is out there, and you can Google it and see just how sincere and passionate those people are in their own convictions, just as we as vegans are sincere and passionate in ours. Okay? Sincerity can't be the criterion here. Passion can't be the criterion. The fact that something's an injustice, the fact that a given law from your perspective is illegitimate, therefore you think it's okay to use illegal force to protest against it. Okay? No. The ethic I promote on this channel is one of doing the best you can. And I don't believe that the best you can do is to engage in theft, vandalism, breaking and entering, terrorism, bombs. I just don't believe that. Sure, if you look back over the history of the whole world, you can find some scenario where the political situation is so extreme that people have no choice but to resort to violence in their own self-defense. Sure, you can find that. But if you think that's the situation today in Berkeley, California, in the name of animal rights and veganism, then you're just as deluded as the neo-Nazis, the anti-vaxxers, and the people who blow up abortion clinics. If you can't see that you're on the same side they're on, you really need to stop and reconsider this romanticized notion of civil disobedience.
À bas le ciel.
Civil disobedience is one of the most hallowed and romanticized concepts in the Western political lexicon. What does it really mean? Pissing off the cops, getting beaten up, and going to prison. That's what it means. So it really does take, it's quite a challenge for the poets and creative writers and filmmakers of our time to come up with a way to romanticize this approach to political activism. This is something I've discussed maybe 3 years ago or more on this channel. It's come up in passing from time to time, but I can't remember recently having a video that really stated what my position on this was. And, you know, again, I'm very happy to have a few supporters like Marianne, who I just recorded a video with. I recorded a video. The context for this video now being made was my fellow Canadian aspiring vegan activist Marianne flew away to attend a major animal rights conference in Berkeley, California, came back, and I got his impressions of it. And in that video, I didn't cross-examine him too much. I wasn't too harsh or too hard on the notorious group Direct Action Everywhere, who it turned out really were the main organizers behind that conference. However, in numerous videos over the last 4 years on this channel, I have stated what my position on this is, and it occurs to me now, especially in the context of my having done a relatively flattering video of talking to someone else and hearing his perspective on Direct Action Everywhere and their use of illegal and low-key violent forms of activism and getting themselves charged with crimes and going to prison, and their rhetoric surrounding civil disobedience, that I should come out and make a short, concise, direct video stating why it is not only I don't preach civil disobedience, I don't practice civil disobedience, I don't encourage others to do it either. Look, guys, the rhetoric surrounding civil disobedience, including what Marianne sort of quoted to me from that conference just now within the vegan movement, it sort of attempts to relocate the question from you and what you're doing and what difference you can make to abstract ideological concepts like the goodness of the law itself. So I noticed he used a kind of hackneyed phrase in saying, well, if laws are illegitimate, then using illegal force or illegal tactics to challenge the law is justified, and so on. You hear this kind of rhetoric quite a bit. But the question we should be engaged in is actually not the formal validity of the law. It's about you and me and what kind of lives we want to live and what kind of difference we can make and what is the best way to go about doing it. And it's really quite dangerous. I mean, even though it seems like a harmless way to approach it, just as, if we're talking about warfare, we can't, shift the discussion to the instruments being used, to the bullets and the blades. We can't disassociate the questions from human lives, human motivations, and real human outcomes. Now, I think the most important thing to stress here is that this approach, it pretends to make judgments on the law. It pretends to pass judgments on the authorities. It pretends to pass judgments on the morality of society at large. But what it really rests on are a series of judgments about you and I, about the activists who are making these decisions. Suppose we were to take the same kind of examples we're using from Direct Action Everywhere, from current vegan protest movements, and instead of the person beneath the mask being an anonymous punk from California, which is often how these protesters portray themselves, the sort of stereotypical ALF radical, left-wing animal liberation extremist radical or ecological radical. What if the man underneath the mask is a medical doctor? Right away you might say, oh, what a waste. Why is he breaking and entering damaging public property, sabotaging a factory? Why is he getting himself put in prison for either stealing animals or, say, burning down a farm or sabotaging a fur store or something? Why isn't he using his position of power and influence and privilege and education as a medical doctor? Why isn't he advocating veganism 10 different ways? Now, what if the man under the mask, let's say it's a hunt saboteur or a laboratory saboteur or someone else who's doing quote-unquote civil disobedience, breaking the law and going to jail, what if they take off the mask and instead they're a nutritionist? What if instead they're an architect? What if instead they're just a talented and reasonably successful musician? Maybe it's a musician you know. You're like, oh yeah, I remember a couple albums from that guy. Why would he get himself put in prison like this? Why would he do this rather than supporting or advocating the vegan cause in some other way? There is a judgment on the people involved here. And implicitly, what we don't want to examine is that you're presuming to say these people are so powerless, so voiceless, so utterly without recourse to making a constructive difference in a democratic society that they have nothing better. They have no choice left other than to throw themselves in the train tracks, throw themselves in prison, throw themselves at the police, throw themselves against the impassive edifice of this society that doesn't care for them, their opinions, to self-destructively, lay themselves down as sacrificial lambs for the progress of the movement. Now, I don't think that's good, even if it were true. I mean, when I take the masks off these people and I meet them face to face, I think, look, you're not such a scumbag. You're not such a bad guy. You're not so terrible. You have something to offer, whether you're a musician or a cook or a janitor. So I've met some janitors who were quite intelligent, resourceful people. And I've met some people with PhDs who were complete imbeciles. That's what you see as you go through this life. I mean, each of us in our way has the same kind of responsibility as a medical doctor. And you may not realize it, whether it's that you're a parent or a policeman or, whatever it is you take on in your life. And even if you don't yet, and when you watch this video, I don't care if you're 15 years old or you're 55. You can take on those responsibilities. You can expand your scope of responsibilities. You can take on responsibilities more important than the average doctor. You're capable of more long-term, especially if you're building up. And the impact of this kind of civil disobedience, when you look at it over a 10-year period, say, and I alluded to that briefly in my interview with Marian, it's so negative that it makes almost any of the other options seem positive. By contrast, including what I'm doing right now, coming on YouTube and trying to be a kind of theoretician, expressing your concern about the future of the movement. Now, if I had made this same video years ago, I'm not going to try to specify a specific number of years, I would have made the following contrast, and now I'm not going to do it. I'm going to explode this. I would have said years ago, look, I know what it's like to be involved in politics in Laos, Cambodia, Thailand, China, and by reading about it, to a lesser extent, other dictatorships around the world. Political science is my field. I've also lived and worked in humanitarian work. And you know what? There are some situations where you just totally lack the options and opportunities we take for granted in a democratic society like Canada or like California, where you really just don't have any choice other than to engage in illegal acts of civil disobedience. And if you have to go to prison, maybe that's what that entails in Cambodia, where people now really have no democracy. They have no way to change their country through elections, so maybe they have to look at other options. And you know what? Honestly, I've matured. Today, I wouldn't say that at all. And I think there is actually a really kind of creeping racism or dehumanization of people on the other side. Because when you know those people face to face, you know a sharp young man in Cambodia, and he may be an architect, and he may be a medical doctor, and he may be a janitor. But you know someone who's sharp and reads books and cares about politics. And if you just look at two options, a fork in the road, like, okay, you can throw yourself against this brick wall, you can throw yourself on the train tracks, you can throw yourself at the police, you can do this useless, self-sacrificial act of civil disobedience and spend 10 years in prison. Or you can maybe cross the border into Thailand. Maybe you're going to migrate to France or, Vancouver, Canada. But let's say you just go a couple miles over the border in Thailand, get yourself a job on a farm. I mean, I'm assuming a totally minimum wage job here. Get yourself an internet connection and spend your time writing articles and recording YouTube videos talking about politics in Cambodia and criticizing the establishment and calling for a change that has to come. Now, when you look at that fork in the road, you might think, hey, come on, Isel, that's not very effective. As a form of activism, working on a farm and being a blogger and YouTube personality and writing articles, maybe getting your articles published in the newspaper from time to time, that's not terribly effective for a lone activist. But my point is, compared to spending 10 years in prison in Cambodia, it's unbelievably effective. And when you talk about civil disobedience, this is the kind of comparison you have to make. So examining the legal, democratically permissible options you've got in Canada, in California, I see no excuse, especially for the vegan movement, to be engaging in these illegal activities that I feel basically undermine the legitimacy of our own movement. Again, I have a whole playlist of videos, but you can see exactly what this is. Direct Action Everywhere, as an example, they run onto a baseball field and interrupt a baseball game in the name of veganism. Guess what? Of course, you're accomplishing nothing. They interrupt the baseball game for 5 minutes. Security pounces on them. They go to jail. Great. Have a good time in jail, getting a lawyer and paying the fines. I mean, I'm not saying they're going to do hard time for that. It's a pretty minor crime, but still, nobody really wants to deal with that. But guess what? You're also discrediting veganism. You think this makes veganism look good in this kind of disruption? They go into, I mean, I could list off all these examples. They go into Chipotle and break down weeping and scream at the employees. They go into a butcher store and scream at the butcher, why don't you kill me instead of the pig? All this histrionic, emotionally overwrought nonsense. It's self-defeating on so many levels, even if they don't get put in prison. But now we've got Wayne Seong crying poor, the leader of Direct Action Everywhere, asking for your donations because he's facing 10 years, some people say possibly 30 years in prison for breaking and entering, theft, destruction of property, etc., because what he's been doing is illegal. He hasn't been doing it in secrecy. He's been filming himself and posting film of him breaking the law on the internet as veganism's #1 fame whore. Not just trying to break the law, but trying to get famous and get donations doing it. That's the game they've been playing. Okay? So, civil disobedience. There's a romanticized literature for this in political science. #1 author in it really is Henry David Thoreau, an American author. This meme was picked up in India by Mohandas Gandhi and totally transformed. Everyone likes to quote a book called Nonviolence and Peace and War by Gandhi. Almost nobody reads it. It doesn't say what you think it says. His version of nonviolence is, it's war by other means. It's actually quite violent. His version of nonviolence is quite different from Henry David Thoreau. And there were a few other big names in there. Actually, the Russian author Leo Tolstoy. He was a major author in the theory of nonviolence and civil disobedience. From a very strange religious perspective, religious anti-establishment perspective. He had different periods of his life where his position was different. But anyway, out of these, I mean, these are, creative authors and intellectuals, they're highly eccentric, those three authors, and they really tried to romanticize this, and to some extent, just as like a literary trope that's still haunting contemporary political discourse. But for my part, when I talk to people about this, again and again in Canada, I ask, have you ever been to City Hall? Have you ever given a deposition at City Hall? Have you actually been to Parliament? Have you ever spoken before the House of Parliament? Have you ever looked at what it takes to get a bill put before Parliament? Have you got what it takes to get your opinion heard as an expert witness in the consideration of a case? There are so many ways to have your voice heard in a democratic system, and it's not the case that these people have exhausted those possibilities before resorting to violence, before resorting to street protest for one thing, yes, but here we're not talking about street protest, we're actually talking about civil disobedience, we're talking about intentionally breaking the law, whether it's to burn something down, break in, steal something, etc., etc. They in general, I can't think of a single exception. They haven't tried those things. They haven't looked into them. And, I think we all know why. It's because ultimately, today the source of romanticization is exactly whatever gets donations, whatever makes money here on YouTube. At the end of the day, sadly, the internet has turned political activism into a popularity contest as never before. And I see Direct Action Everywhere, DXE, and the current generation of people preaching and practicing non-violent violence. What else am I going to call it? So-called civil disobedience. I really do see you guys as the bottom of the barrel. Hit me up.
À bas le ciel.